one of the people that I met while I was in Asia is an environmental activist. And so today I want to tell you a little bit about what she's doing and talk a bit about environmental sustainability and personal responsibility.
Hey everyone, welcome to XYZ Storytellers, a platform started by 3 people across generations X, Y, and Z, engaging in conversations in the spirit of increased empathy and understanding.
Hi, I'm Erin, the millennial traveler and author. I'm an empath with a drive for connecting to others. I enjoy singing in the car, eating pints of ice cream, and hanging out with my cat, Gimbal.
Hey, I'm Rich, the gray-beard Gen Xer with 30 years in conference rooms or airplanes around the globe. I've also been a Little League coach and a family bus driver. This podcast is a way for me to have the types of conversations that just don't happen enough in my day-to-day life.
And me, I'm Lily. I've always been very opinionated and I speak passionately about things no matter who I might be with at the time. I'm here to share my thoughts and get the perspectives of 2 other generations so I can grow and expand my understanding of the world around me.
With XYZ Storytellers, our conversations aren't meant to be political, social, or even related to current events. We are just recording authentic conversations on a variety of topics, hoping they will resonate in some small way. Thanks for listening.
So I met this incredible individual named Laura while I was in Indonesia. And since then, she has continued to blow my mind and both inspire me and make me feel horrible about my habits towards being environmentally responsible. She has gone so far, she's entirely waste-free. The few things that she does accumulate, she can keep in a tiny container, reusable container, over the course of even a year. Usually it's things like airplane stubs if she does have to travel, or things that she didn't know had an individual wrapper in it, things that were oopsie moments rather than consciously buying something that was plastic or that would create waste. She's even gone so far as to create reusable toilet paper, which she then carries with her and washes and reuses. She's gone to the level of extremes that I admire so deeply, but yet can't get myself to go, yes, I can do that. And there was a time when we were in the Netherlands or maybe Belgium, my friends and I were in this restaurant and the recycling bins were very confusing. And so we went to go throw away our food things after we were eating, and we couldn't really tell what was supposed to go into which bin. And so we just kind of used whatever bin we thought appropriate. And there was this group of women at a table across from the bins, and they just kind of looked at us with horror, like we were doing it all wrong and we were killing the environment because we didn't know which bins to put this waste in. And I just think environmental sustainability, it's such a hot topic today, but it's also a very controversial one, not because I don't think we should do it and we shouldn't be personally responsible, but because our society makes it so hard to live in that way that it brings up the question of what are the small things that we could do that aren't completely inconveniencing and spending more time. But then is that a question when it comes to sustainability and the environment? Should we be putting in that time? But then does our society allow space for that? So I know I personally struggle with debating about convenience versus environmental sustainability, and even going to the grocery store and, they put all of your fruits in plastic bags. They have vegetables that come in plastic bags, and it's really hard to avoid that, particularly in an American society where most everything is individually packaged, if you really look at it. And we don't have a ton of bulk stores beyond maybe nuts and some dried fruits. So I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on, obviously, I'm willing to bet we all think that environmental sustainability is important here. But what are your thoughts on the pressure to be environmentally sustainability and personally responsible? And do you feel like you have the capacity to do that in today's culture? Because I don't think I'm ready for reusable toilet paper.
I know I'm on the other side of that line.
Yeah.
Lily, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I definitely want to be more sustainable, not just because it's like a trend or like people are like pressuring others to be sustainable. I think it's genuinely just important because of how like quick everything is changing with the climate change and the activists and all of the talk about it. So I definitely want to be more sustainable, but it's just hard because everything, like you said, everything is in plastic, everything's in styrofoam, everything has a paper receipt that comes with it, everything has something that isn't sustainable, and I find it really hard to find a way to avoid them. So I mean, if I was given like tips and a strategy to do it, I would definitely do it, but I just don't have that right now.
I think we're all part of a system, you know, and this is a systemic issue as much as it is an individual issue, right? So to the extent that, you know, every grocery store, 95% of the grocery stores within an hour's drive of where I am have plastic bottles for the milk. And maybe there's 5% of them that offer glass bottles for milk that you then recycle, right? Yeah, I mean, there's an element of convenience and there's an element of being realistic about what you can sustain, right? And so I think just trying to avoid being wasteful, right? The idea that, you know, it used to be that napkins were out in the restaurant and people would grab, you know, 20 napkins and throw 18 of them away. Now, like, you go to some restaurants and the napkins are behind the counter and they give you 2 napkins and you deal with it, right? You know, so there's systemic solutions. It's not always to the individual. You know, that being said, though, I am contemplating, you know, significantly reducing the footprint of what we have and what I do when I retire. You know, I talk to Billy all the time about living in a microhome and having, you know, living off the grid. And, you know, that's something that's actually probably attainable if I really wanted to put my mind to it. But given where we are right now, it's not something that you used to feel like, oh, you know, everyone reduce, recycle, reuse, and every decision you make. And to a point that was accurate. And it did, I think, at least raise awareness enough to a point where companies now know if they are trying to become sustainable, then that's a favorable thing for their brand. And that you can choose, because we're a consumer society, right? So I think the best way that I can on a daily basis is I can be sensitive to who are the sustainable brands, and use those things, right? But the idea of composting everything or using reusable containers, or, you know, I read an article and it's funny. It said that in some ways those reusable grocery bags, those green ones that they have, the felt with the handles and everything, that in some ways those are actually doing more damage than the plastic bags that they were meant to replace, because, you know, they are less biodegradable than the plastic, you know, because of ways. But I really get excited when I'm at a restaurant and I realize that my cup is made out of some sort of corn syrup derivative and the straw is made out of some sort of recycled paper derivative with some kind of natural polymer to keep it so that for the time that I need it to work, it's going to work. If I let it sit in my drink for an hour and a half, it's going to be a soggy mess, right? But if I drink my drink in the next 15 minutes, it should be fine. So, I mean, I think there's solutions that are getting done out there that go unnoticed at some level. And while your friend's approach is commendable, I don't know that it makes that much of a difference. I think it's a mindset, and I think it helps her do what she's doing because she seems like she's active in trying to create awareness and everything. But, you know, like you said, you're not ready to do the recycling of your toilet paper. I don't know that her using a reusable cloth makes a lick of difference, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Well, and that's the big discussion, is there are a ton of environmental activists out there, and, you know, I follow a couple of them on Instagram, and that thought does go through my mind. Is it's like, okay, well, if I do this one time, if I don't take away food in a takeaway container or to-go container one time, how big of a difference does it really make? But then I think, to the other point, we also have a certain perspective, at least my generation has a certain perspective towards politics. Well, what is one vote going to make a difference? And I think that that's a really sad perspective, but it's a reality that a lot of people are perceiving things in that way of like, I don't make a difference. If I am one person that does this, it doesn't change the overall outcome. But I think the large conversation about that is just, if everyone did one small thing, then it's millions of people doing that one good action rather than one person doing it. And so I think that that's the goal of environmental activism, is to get more than one person to make one better choice with their waste. But to that point, you're right, it's systemic. If we don't have the ability to recycle, I mean, the nearest recycling center to us is 8 minutes down the road. So we have to take all of our recycling, collect it in our 2-bedroom apartment, put it into my car, and then drive to the recycling center 8 minutes away. It's an extra effort that we go through to do our part. In reality, what we really should be doing is just reducing waste overall. Even though it is recyclable, it's still waste, and there's no guarantee that that recyclable material goes to the recycling center. Some of it does end up in a landfill. So there's that going on in the back of my mind. And a lot of it's just it's a mental state. It's, how can I reduce waste before I need to figure out what to do with it? But like we've pointed out, it's hard to do that when you live in a society that is driven by commercialism and driven by having more and needing more to survive. And when it all comes wrapped in plastic. I mean, we got a new piece of furniture from IKEA, and oh my gosh, it was just every single piece had plastic with it. At the hospital, I was at the hospital with my dad the other day, and they were unpackaging some treatment, and it all came wrapped in plastic. In that sense, it's probably it's a need for hygienics. That's what they need, the plastic to keep things clean and to keep things separated and safe from outside material. But I'm looking at all that plastic going, good Lord, if there are hundreds of millions of people needing this exact same treatment, that is so much more plastic than what our society can handle.
But the solution isn't necessarily to stop buying things from IKEA or stop using things at the hospital. The solution is when you hear companies that say they're going to have a negative carbon footprint by 2025. Mm-hmm. And what does that mean? Well, that means that somewhere along the line, there's going to be a company that's going to find a way, and they're actively looking at it now. How do I create a material that's similar in property to plastic, but is not carbon based, and allows you to wrap medical devices, right, in a way that whatever you wrap it in, it looks like and acts like plastic, right? When we're down to the molecular level now, and there, different things like graphene sheets that are like an atom wide, right? So they're doing things scientifically. That's where things are going to change. Tesla and his electric cars, right? Solar power and the ability to get solar energy from even, get more energy from a smaller cell and have it be more efficient. But, even like people say, oh, well, wind power is completely recyclable. Well, here's the thing. The wind turbines that they make, that they put on those huge windmills, they're huge, and they break and they wear down, and they are 100% not recyclable. So now there are places that they actually have to find, where are we going to put these old unusable wind turbines that we used for solar, for wind power, but now they're going to be landfills filled with these large, huge, building-sized wind turbine or wings or whatever you want to call them, that aren't recyclable.
Not to mention the effect on bird migration. That's a big conversation now, is the effect on migration of animals, which, in my mind, I'm like, well, the birds can figure out their way around it, but it does make a huge difference.
There's that. I mean, there's, the extreme, well, and that's the other thing, right? The extreme to invalidate the whole, right? So, but my point is, the idea when I walk into a restaurant and I get a cup and it says this is made out of corn syrup derivative, right? But then you look and you go, well, but then at the same time, people go, well, you know, for a long time it was ethanol fuel made out of corn, right? The actual amount of energy it takes to turn a bushel of corn into a gallon of fuel is actually more than what happens from a carbon footprint perspective than producing a gallon of gasoline from oil. And so while it was like, well, we moved off the carbon footprint and everyone, yeah, that's great, but nobody looked at what the ramifications of that were, right? And, you know, recycling. So now you have so many recycling programs with so many bins, right? If they're not exquisitely managed because they are complex and you need to have many different things, now I'm seeing things where towns are saying it's costing us more to run our recycling program than we can afford. And so if your recycling program creates a negative impact economically, it's not sustainable, right? So there's this whole reverse arms race of everything in theory is a good idea, but what's sustainable? And I think that's where you start to see those brands that differentiate themselves are going to be the ones that win, and people just become more educated as consumers. But I can tell you right now, an easy way to become more carbon neutral is drink a glass of water that's been filtered through your fridge, and don't get orange juice, don't get that cranberry juice in a different bottle, don't get the milk, don't get, you know, instead of having 4 different bottles of 4 different flavored things that you'd like to have, just drink a glass of water out of the tap. You know, and so there's some very easy ways that you could do sustainable things and simplify your life at the same time. You know, it's great that I can recycle, but my recycle bin is filled with plastic things. Oh, they're all being recycled. So it used to be that recycling got you a clean conscience. Now I look at what goes in and is now labeled recycling, and I go, that's still a lot of crap.
Yeah, yeah. Lily, what's the trend that you see with your friend groups and in your school? Are people consciously thinking about this, or is this kind of an afterthought, or do you see any differences in your school system? Do they offer recycling and waste-free products?
It's definitely like split down the middle, I think, because some people will be like, oh, like, why are you using like a metal straw? Why are you using a reusable like Ziploc bag? Like my friend, she has like these rubber Ziploc bags that still close, but like they're reusable, so she can just wash them out when she gets home, and then she can put more stuff in them, and instead of using just like regular plastic Ziploc bags, like she can use those for as long as she wants, and she's not wasting all that plastic. And some people will be like, well, why are you doing that? Like, just use plastic. It's like you're not doing anything. Like what you were saying earlier, like, is it really changing anything if just one person isn't using plastic bags? So everyone, it's kind of split. Like some people will be like, oh, she's so cool for using that, like I wish I could do that. And then some people are like, why are you using reusable Ziploc bags? So it's a trend in some areas where I see people walking around with water bottles. Like I haven't seen a plastic water bottle in like 8 months. Like I haven't seen one. Everyone has a refillable water bottle that they use, and they just go to the water fountain and fill it up. But at the same time, we still use styrofoam trays and plastic forks and knives for lunch. So it's more of the students doing it than it is the school system. I think they're not doing it like now or like soon, but they've been talking about getting like metal or like glass like trays or plates that we can use, because most schools have like those hard like plastic trays that you can just put your stuff on, but we just have styrofoam ones. So I think they're trying to shift over into something more sustainable than just having, because we have like 4,000 students in my school, so like having every single one of them almost using a styrofoam tray every day at lunch, like it's so unsustainable. And I think they're realizing that. So
well, and I think you raise a good point, Lily, about that whole thing about the trays and everything. So I'll give you a story that kind of resonates. At one end of the spectrum, you have Europe, where I went to offices in Germany for SAP, and just the act of going and getting a cup of coffee, or you had, or at the cafeteria, you had glass dishes, you had real glasses, you had metal silverware, you had reusable plastic trays, and nothing was wrapped. Everything was put out, and it was in a place chilled, right? But there was, when you looked at the actual trash produced, right, it was minimal. And whereas if you go to an American office and you go to get a cup of coffee, the coffee station is paper cups, plastic lids, pod-based system. So you've got all that waste associated with it, right? Or even just a hotel. You go to a hotel in Europe and you go to the breakfast, and it's all regular glass and metal and reusable stuff. And you go to like a Holiday Inn and they're all using styrofoam, this paper, that everything is disposable. Why? Because, and this is where I think we're at a point where toxic capitalism, right? The idea of the cheapest thing in the world is to just do everything is disposable, right? And so the easiest way is I don't have to, if I just put everything as styrofoam and paper and plastic, it goes in the trash, and I have one person who just changes out the trash bag at the end of the breakfast. Whereas in Europe, if you go to a breakfast buffet in there, they've got a team of people who are responsible for putting out breakfast, and then they have to wash the dishes and get them ready for the next day. And so it's two people working, I'm just using round numbers, right? Two people working to sustain that reusable model instead of one person working to cover that disposable model. So until the system changes back in the States to match up with that other model, you're kind of swimming uphill when it comes to actually feeling like you can make an individual change. At the other end of the spectrum is China. You've been there, Aaron. There's no place that has a greater disregard at some levels for the environment than China. Now, the other side of that, though, is they're doing some pretty amazing things because they're building out cities almost from scratch. And now they're building what really are sustainable cities, and so they're at both ends of the spectrum. Whereas the United States has kind of progressed along, and there's a lot of infrastructure in place to support this disposable mentality. But that's why I say it's systemic, it's not individual.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's really interesting that you mentioned China, because when I went over to China with the perspective of, they don't give a crap about the environment. But what I learned while I was there with interviewing leaders in environmental sustainability and corporate responsibility in terms of the environmental impact of their businesses was that China is actually making great headway in sustainability. And they're not, for example, if you get food to go, they're giving it in paper bags, and they're not giving you utensils anymore. They're making small movements, kind of in the same way that we have seen here. They're making smaller movements towards sustainability, and they do have an entire underground recycling system. So you have everyday citizens that can actually make a living off of collecting recyclable materials from dumpsters and from the street. And then that's where you get those giant bikes piled high with, squashed cardboard boxes, is those are all ordinary citizens who have found a method of taking and collecting all of those recyclable materials, and then the recycling companies pay them money to turn those in. And so there's this informal recycling system that is really expansive. But then to the other extent, it's, we've been sending China our garbage for decades. And so they're now having to deal with the aftermath of that. And you think about all the tech, the tech garbage and the other garbage that we have sent over, they're trying to figure out what to do with that. And in much of Asia, that's why I say not everything goes to the recycling center, but it's particularly prominent in Asia and Southeast Asia. You have these recyclable materials, but sometimes the trucks that actually are meant to transport them don't know where to take them, because some recycling centers are full or they're not accepting new loads. And so a lot of that recycling ends up in the landfill, or they have created little hidden non-legal landfills because they don't know where else to take their trash. So it's really an epidemic in China, particularly because we sent them so much crap, they don't know what to do with it. And so it's kind of heartbreaking in a way to hear, particularly a couple of years ago, you would see all of these news articles about how China was killing the planet. And it's just so heartbreaking because we're not taking responsibility for the fact that we put them in that position. And now we're letting them be the scapegoat for that. But they are making significant headway in sustainability. And I think that's something that needs to be highlighted a little bit more here in the States, because they're making, in some ways, better progress than we are, particularly in the systemic approach. So I think that's...
Well, I think their top-down governmental structure definitely lends itself to being able to change directions. I think when you looked at the smog in the cities for the last decade, that's even quieted down a little bit. But for the longest time, they just were the biggest example. And there were times when they would, sometimes sustainability isn't all about recycling, right? Sometimes sustainability is, do you need to really dam up that river? Do you need to divert that river simply because you can, right? So some of the Yangtze River and some of the dams that they've done that have been on a huge scale and have displaced hundreds of thousands of people and flooded. Now, the US has been damming rivers and flooding out and creating reservoirs for ages, right? So I'm in no way trying to claim any moral high ground for the US, but I think sustainability also becomes the idea of what are you willing to do to the environment to grow, and sometimes sustainability is birth rate. It's rehabbing buildings in Detroit rather than raising them. It's building out houses that are a smaller average footprint, but are also much more energy efficient. I mean, it's just this evolutionary thing that happens. So at some levels, capitalism is a part of the solution, but in some ways, capitalism is part of the problem, right? And again, there's socialist approach and communist approaches that are good and some that are bad. But I still do believe that when you can put a focus on where people are failing, it can cause systemic change. And our changes we need to make right now need to be systemic. They need to be big and they need to be impactful. And, you could rally, 100,000 people to reuse their toilet paper, but you've got 6 billion, 8 billion people on the planet. I don't think reusable toilet paper is going to make a dent. It makes a philosophical statement, and it puts you in a position where you can say things and have authority. And again, I'm not kind of dismissing that, right? Because it does allow you to be that to claim that moral high ground in a positive and constructive way, not in a self-righteous way. I'm trying to be respectful but I think it's more about, driving companies to do the responsible thing. And that's where the Paris Accord, when Trump pulled out of it and all of the things that he did, where he's not acknowledging climate change. Well, Europe and a lot of global companies based in the US have said, well, we don't need the government to tell us what to do. And if they pull out of this, we're going to go, because we've made a commitment to our global consumer base that we are going to be a responsible company. And so in some ways, capitalism and globalization has helped. But in other ways, globalization has absolutely hurt. So it's this kind of, I use a term in other contexts called directionally correct. Now, are we directionally correct? I don't know. I think we've kind of slowed the slope to chaos, but we haven't necessarily reversed the course, and that's the big question, right?
So to that point of commercialism, though, I mean, Lily, do you feel like you and your peers select environmentally sustainable brands? So I'm thinking particularly of like Hydro Flask is one of the reusable water bottles that a lot of people choose, and it's not an inexpensive purchase. But I do know that there's a growing number of consumers that are willing to pay more for something if it's made in an environmentally sustainable way and will last them a long time. Do you feel like that's where the mentality is, or do you feel like that's not really a factor in reusable materials?
No, I think the people at my school and around me that do want to be sustainable, they they I don't know if it's consciously, but they think about it and they're like, well, if I spend like $15 more and get this sustainable thing rather than a plastic container for it, I can use it so many more times and only for $15 more. So I think the way that we think of it, or at least the way that I think of it, is you're spending more money at the time because it is sustainable and it is going to be more expensive, but just think you're going to refill that thing and reuse it so many times over, and instead of having to rebuy what you would have bought for the less expensive option. So I think we're just thinking ahead in the future, because when I buy like reusable water bottles or like containers for my food, I think of the fact that I'm going to be using this so many more times in the future instead of having to throw it away and then rebuy it again like next week. So I definitely think it's a factor, but we don't necessarily think of the companies that are making it. We just think of how we're going to get use out of it.
But what about making a cup of coffee from organic coffee beans that are shipped in hemp bags that you grind at home and you make and put into your own container, and you don't have to drive through the drive-through at Starbucks and get the plastic container of your white mocha cappuccino. And so while it's, no, I'm not, again, none of this, look, I go to Starbucks all the time, so I'm not trying to claim any moral high ground. I'm just trying to point out that, my generation, maybe we used things that weren't sustainable, but we also didn't go to Starbucks 3 times a day and use 3 different plastic cups to have our frappuccinos and end up throwing out those things on the way. And so, I didn't create any plastic cups growing up, but I didn't use a reusable, I used a water bubbler. I just leaned over the water fountain and drank from that without actually needing to have anybody manufacture this. And again, it's not meant to do anything other than to kind of give a different view and context to using these is not going to save the planet. Finding a complete alternative to fossil fuels. I think I'm becoming more aware of it, and I'm struggling with it right now. The whole meat eating, and moving to a plant-based diet, and the actual impact of the dairy and meat industry on our planet.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's a systemic thing, right? Until we get to a point where we tilt the bar and say, instead of 5% of people eat a plant-based diet, 50% of the people eat a plant-based diet. That's the kind of systemic change that we need to have. And it needs to be on those impactful things. And Lily, none of what I said is meant to be critical. I'm just giving a different view.
Well, we live in a convenience-based society. I mean, I have one of the reusable Starbucks cups. I bought that because I went in with the mentality of when I do buy Starbucks, at least I'm not wasting a cup. It's very easy to wash. It still looks like the Starbucks cup. So if you're trying to be trendy or whatever, you still have that option of showing Starbucks is my drink of choice, which is a reason that a lot of consumers choose the brand that they do.
That's fine.
So I applaud them.
You never forget it?
But then I forget it all the damn time. I never have that cup with me when I want coffee.
And so when you don't have that cup, do you skip your trip to Starbucks?
Nope, I don't. And I'm the first person to admit that, because most often, and really the only reason that I get Starbucks anymore anyway is if I have gift cards, because it's just too expensive for me to fund that kind of lifestyle. I drink more coffee at home than I do out. And if I am in a cafe, I will ask for a cup to stay in the cafe rather than in a to-go cup. So I do make little choices like that, but if I'm in a pinch and I need coffee and I forgot my cup, I will still go through the drive-through. And that's just because we live in a convenience-based society. And it kind of goes back to our conversation about self-care and knowing when to find that balance, because there are so many days where I am back to back to back appointments. I don't have time to run home and grab my cup, but I can't afford to skip out on the caffeine because I just need it to get through that next meeting. And it's hard when you are living a life that feels so hectic and chaotic and busy because either you have the pressure on yourself to be an achiever, or you put that on yourself, or you're just loving what you do so much that you can't help but overpower your schedule. We live in a world where we make that possible for ourselves, but then we need other things to be convenient, like food and beverages. And until we figure out a way to rid ourselves of that need for convenience, I don't think we're going to make as much progress individually towards a sustainable lifestyle. But also, to that extent, if I were given a choice between a sustainable option and a non-sustainable option, and the sustainable option is twice the price, I'm probably going to go with the least sustainable, because I'm not currently in a financial position to be able to go buy all organic, plant-based, protein, plastic-free. It's just not in my financial means. So that's the other big part of this. And Lily, that's kind of why I asked you the question about like hydro flasks and kind of the lean towards sustainable products, or what the cost is because I have a ton of friends who will buy a sustainable brand, but it's too expensive for me to reach for. There are other cheaper options, but they may not be as sustainable as that option. So then I have to weigh, okay, well, do I want something that's just kind of sustainable versus something that's not sustainable at all and is the cheapest way to go? Or do I want to spend that money? And so it's really hard in the younger generations, especially when those finances may or may not be there to help fund a truly sustainable lifestyle, or one that leaves a better impact than shopping at H&M and Forever 21 and places that are known for their fast fashion industries. If I need a camisole, I'm probably going to go there because I can get one for $5 versus $25 made with hemp. It's a logical financial choice and at my life stage. And that's part of the biggest problem that I see in my mind is the price for sustainability.
So I guess the reason that the people at my school have more sustainable or try to be more sustainable is because we all still live with our parents. We don't have to pay bills, or most of us don't. I don't know about all of them because I know some people pay like their phone and car bills, but I guess like
They do?
some people, I guess, yeah.
Uh-oh, you just talked your way into paying your own car bills.
I don't think so.
She says with confidence.
But I don't know. I think that since we're buying those sustainable options, but we're not like, the Starbucks cup thing, like we might not always use our reusable Starbucks cup, but more often than not, we know we're getting coffee before school. We're like, everyone has a routine before school. I always go to Dunkin', I always get a coffee. And so I think the people that do have a Starbucks cup and they know they're going to get coffee, they bring it and it saves you 10 cents. They take 10 cents off your order and you get to carry around a cute Starbucks cup. Like, I think that's not more for sustainability, but I think people are just doing it just to have a cute little, like, oh, like, this is my Starbucks cup. Because more often than not, I see people carrying around like their huge, ginormous, like venti Starbucks cups, but the reusable ones like every day. And they'll go to first period and I'll see it all on their desks. So even though we might not always use it, I think it's a good option to have. If you do want to use it, then you have that option. But if you can't buy it, like I understand that. So I'm not saying it's easy for everyone to be sustainable, and I know they're more expensive, but I think that it's just like a more prevalent thing to see at my school.
Well, and then you have the managers who you're like super proud walking into work with your brand new reusable Starbucks cup, and then they don't realize that it's reusable and they throw it away, and then they have to go buy you another one, which is totally what happened to my first reusable Starbucks cup because she didn't check to see if it was reusable, which I was like, girl, they've got a totally different feel, the plastic versus the reusable one, but whatever. I digress. It was a bad story.
So, I mentioned earlier about being systemic. So here's the thing. When I grew up, there was a commercial that was very popular, and it was a picture of an Indian chief on a horse. And he was looking out over the horizon and over a town and a landscape. Back in the 60s, when McDonald's first started and you got your meals and you had them in your car and you had your paper bag and you ate your burger and you were done with it, guess what you did? You rolled down your window and you threw it to the side of the highway.
I cannot believe that. I can't imagine a society where that's a thing.
Not everybody did, but it wasn't unusual. Whereas today, if you did that, you can be guaranteed that someone's going to pull over, pick it up, chase you down the road, and shove it back in your window and go, put your own shit in the trash. Right?
I did that to a guy on a motorbike in Asia. He got a cigarette out of his box and he dropped the box on the ground. And so I leaned over and I picked it up and I put it in my bike and I just looked at him like, seriously?
Yeah. But well, and then if you had a factory, generally the reason that factories were near rivers is because any factory process generally creates wastewater. And all you did was you created a retaining wall alongside, so you leveled your land, and then there was a pipe. And guess where the pipe went?
Into the river.
Straight into the river. Toxic chemicals, sludge, food byproducts, blood from slaughterhouses. I mean, there were rivers that it was just flat out dangerous. You were told, don't swim in that river. And so, over the generations, it's definitely systemic changes were made. And like I said, the corn syrup based thing, the cardboard straw, or the fact that now at restaurants, they don't give you a straw. I was at the Legal Seafoods in the airport the other day. They gave you a glass with ice. And unless you ask for a straw, their assumption is you're going to drink it without the straw, right? With the ice water, whereas before the straw was automatically put down with the drink, no matter what you had, right? Or at Starbucks now, your frozen drinks, you don't get a straw. You have that lid that's, allows you to drink it without a straw. I mean, so those are the systemic changes that start to happen. But here's the other thing. There's diet fads that come out and they go, oh, you don't eat this or you have to eat that. And this causes cancer, so avoid that. And then like butter and margarine and all that, right? And then it's, a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years later, there's another study that comes out and says, you know what we said about butter? Yeah, stop that. You can eat that. That's good fat. That's keto. So you need to go do that. And you need to have butter, and margarine is bad. And so, we've been ping-ponged, my generation, back and forth between the same thing caused, was good for you. Saccharin or the sugar substitutes were good for you. Then they caused cancer. And then there was another variation, stevia. And it's like, guess what? I used to put 2 teaspoons of sugar in my coffee. I put a half of one in. I take the edge off, but it's still natural, right? So it's the same thing with recycling. I mean, I don't know if I've been stressed. I'll be honest. We're going to have a barbecue. Well, you can't bring glass and metal to a barbecue picnic. Mm-hmm. So you find yourself in the aisle at the Walmart or the Target or the grocery store, and you're like, do I get the styrofoam cups, the paper cups, the red Solo cups, the paper, the really cheap paper ones where I'm going to have to use 3 to keep them from falling apart? Or do I get the really thick and expensive ones that are going to stay together, but they're probably coated in plastic, which means they don't recycle quite as easily and they're not as biodegradable? To me, when I go into that aisle, because I don't go into it as much anymore because we don't have as many kids, I actually get stressed because I can't keep track. Is styrofoam better or is it not? And paper was bad because it was killing our trees. And then the paper industry figured out how to farm acres of land in ways that they weren't taking old growth forest. They were basically treating it like a crop. And so if you ever go to upstate Washington, and Weyerhaeuser is one of the big paper producers and logging companies, they have these acres of forest that are all a year apart in age. And they've got it to a point now where they basically, when it gets to be at the 5-year mark or whatever it is, they harvest that acre and then they plant. And then they go over to this other acre that's now 5 years next year and they harvest that. And now it's a sustainable use of that same acreage. And so now Dunkin' Donuts went and got rid of their styrofoam and replaced it with paper cups. First time I got a paper cup at a Dunkin's drive-thru, I was like, what the hell just happened? They handed me a paper coffee cup and I'm going, something's not right. And it took me about a couple of beats before I realized, oh my God, that's what it is. The paper cup. I'm used to the styrofoam, right? but for the longest time, everything that you saw was either healthy for you, then it wasn't, then it was healthy for you again. This was recyclable, but actually ethanol is not good. It actually takes more of a carbon footprint. And so now you don't want ethanol. So you don't want a hybrid car that uses the E fuel. You know, and then where do we recycle the batteries for the Teslas? How long do those last? And where's that going to go? It's a never ending. So it's just like, as long as the consciousness is where it needs to be and we're directionally correct, the biggest way that we can impact the environment is to slow the growth of people on it.
Well, and that's, you kind of hit the nail right on the head, because as someone who gets anxious in the cheese aisle, because there's so many freaking different kinds of cheese and different brands and different prices and different flavors, and it's just like, I remember being in one Kroger, I think it was in Indianapolis, and you know, like the edge wall of the grocery store is like one of the longest aisles, and it was just all cheese. And my mind was blown as to how many options there were, and why did there need to be that many options. And that's, so when you ask someone who gets stressed out by cheese to go and make sustainable options and weigh in not only the product, where it was made, how it was shipped, also the price and affordability and the value, how long am I going to be able to use it? It's like, I just freak out and grab the first thing off the shelf. And so there's you know, living in the market that we do, it adds a level of complexity to making better choices, because there are so many freaking choices out there. And it goes right back to the same reason that there was this whole debacle between natural versus organic. You could label something all natural without it being actually FDA based or FDA registered organic. And so with the marketing that we have and the market that we live in and all of the competition, it's so easy to accidentally buy the wrong thing that it's stressful to even try to make a good choice. And so I think it's going to be really interesting in the years to come to see what new products enter the market and how they're marketed, because at this point in time, it's really hard to tell what's actually good for you, for the environment, and for your wallet.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Make the sustainable choice of what you're going to use to eat the healthy food that's made in a sustainable way that is good for you, so you can live longer and that you're eating well between your runs to the gym, while you're actually taking care of yourself, and you're aware of how do you have healthy relationships with the people around you, so that you can be kind to people that are, I mean, come on, people.
Life isn't hard. It's simple. Life is simple.
I just want to get up and sit in front of my plastic TV and hang out for a day.
And none of this is to say that this is a viable excuse for not making sustainable choices. I want to make that clear to anyone still listening, that this is not an excuse. It's merely a conversation about the complexity of what it means to make sustainable choices and how difficult it can be, particularly if you're not in the income zone that you can easily make the sustainable decision. It is a battle when you go into the store to try to make choices. And so the better that we can make our system, the better off individual choices will be. But in that interim, trying not to produce waste is obviously the ideal. But I think we also need to focus on where the best change is going to happen. And that's with the system, that's with the stores themselves. And I think that's something that I would like to work a little bit more towards, is having my voice heard about, hey, I didn't need this straw. I really think you should stop bringing me a straw every time that I ask for a drink. And just
because if they brought it to you, it's going to end up in the trash because it got out of whatever bin it's supposed to be in. But you talk about recycle, reduce, reuse, right? And, you know, my dad grew up in a generation where you had maybe 3 pairs of pants, you know, 4 t-shirts, a couple of dress shirts, 2 pairs of shoes, maybe only 1, you know. And now, and again, I'm only just trying to point out some of the differences. If you were to tell someone in your generation, Lily, that somebody lived with that limited of a wardrobe, right? Your reusable Starbucks cup and your hydro flask doesn't really carry a lot of weight, you know, because what did it take for you to have those 23 t-shirts 16 pairs of jeans, 5 pairs of shoes. What did it take to produce all that and have that in every closet of every high school kid on the planet, just about? And oh, by the way, the idea of drinking anything other than tap water. So, but that was the same generation that was dumping crap in the river and throwing their trash on the ground, right? So no one's been perfect. I just think that the collective consciousness is where it needs to be. And it's just a matter of whether we've put the brakes on the train early enough.
Mm-hmm. Any final thoughts on sustainability and personal responsibility?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I read a story recently about a scientist who was very well known in the 50s, and he was writing books and articles about how the world was headed for a complete world famine.
Oh, I think we lost Rich for a hot second.
I think his phone died.
While he comes back, Lily, any final thoughts?
I just think we're moving in the right direction. People might not completely change their lifestyle and be 100% waste-free, but I think we're headed there. Did your phone die?
Only a matter of time before that happened.
His phone died.
So just to update listeners, Rich's phone died, but he went into Lily's room and is now sitting with Lily. So we've got him back to finish his final thought.
Well, no. So his prediction was that the world was already on its way to complete collapse. And but what he neglected to take into account was the ability to innovate, advances in technology, changes in behavior, and all of those things that we all collectively have. And so as long as you raise awareness, and if someone's out there touting the worst case scenario, let them tout it, because at the very least, it's going to cause people to think about what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This has been another XYZ Storytellers episode. Stay tuned for next week's topic. Like, follow, and subscribe. And I'm not going to snap my fingers this time because it's getting redundant. Oh.
We did it for you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.